And we are joined by some special guests, Nathan and Rob, and they are going to help us understand church planting today. So, this is going to be an exciting podcast, and I know that you're going to benefit greatly from this as we are. We've been looking forward to this one for a while. So, let's just get right to it. Nathan, why don't you start? Share a little bit about yourself, about your family, your ministry. We'd love to kind of get to know you a little bit, and then Rob, would you just kind of do the same?
Yeah, well, thank you, gentlemen, for having me on. What a great opportunity, and I look forward to chatting about church planning and obviously as we put our heads together for the greater good and growth of the kingdom of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. A little bit about myself. I'm Nathan White. I pastor at Christ Reformed Baptist Church in Lookout Mountain, Tennessee. That is on a suburb of Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I've been here almost 6 years now. We started as a church plant and labored here for a number of years. And 3 years ago, we constituted and kind of established ourselves in that sense. But we're still very young and have a lot of growth, needed growth. But I have a real desire for church planning. I learned a lot of lessons over those years, and certainly our desire to send out and prepare and send out men from our congregation, and to see churches planted, of course, all over the Southeast, but across the nation and across the world as well. But I went to Covenant College, which is here on Lookout Mountain. That's where I did my undergraduate work. Having grown up in Atlanta, Covenant College is a PCA college, and it's about an hour and a half north of Atlanta. I did my undergraduate work there, and then I went out to Westminster Seminary, California, which is outside of San Diego, and that's where I did my MDiv work in seminary. I also graduated from IRBS Theological Seminary. At the time, IRBS had a partnership with Westminster, so I got kind of good Presbyterian doctrine from the Westminster tradition, but I got some Baptist education as well from IRBS and Dr. Jim Renahan. That was a great opportunity for me. IRBS is now in Mansfield, Texas, outside of Fort Worth. They're their own standalone seminary, but at the time they were at Westminster, and I greatly benefited from that education. And it's actually there where I ran into and well, not ran into, but I developed deep friendships with men who have been associated with Rob Clay and churches that he served in, and that's kind of my connection to our brother here, Rob Clay, and what eventually led to him coming out here to Tennessee. So that's a little bit about me. I'm married. I have 3 children and 2 teenagers and a 5-year-old. So let me tell you, life has not slowed down. Things are crazy, but the Lord has been really good. We love it here in Tennessee, and the Lord has blessed our church and my family, and we hope to serve here for many, many more years.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, my name's Rob Clay. I've been, I guess, pastoring since the early 2000s in Texas and across different parts of Nebraska. And now I'm serving in Lookout Mountain, Tennessee at Christ Reformed Baptist Church. I've been there since about October, and been really enjoying the ministry and service and the labors alongside Nathan White. It's been really great, and blessing to just serve alongside him and proclaim Christ and try to build into the sheep and grow them and shepherd them. And while we've been there, it's been awesome just to see the Lord raising up other godly men to, and one day, hopefully, we can send out to plant churches. And that's been a joy and a pleasure. Even this last weekend, we had one of our gifted brothers proclaiming Christ at one of our associational churches in Alabama. Awesome to see and to hear. And I've been married this year. Wow, it'll be 18 years. And I've got 5 wonderful kiddos, and some of their artwork is up behind me here. And so God's blessed us with that. And we've been enjoying our time at Christ Reformed Baptist Church, and feeling welcomed and loved, and it's been a wonderful time. So.
Well, thanks, guys. So I got a question. When I was growing up, and I grew up in a small Baptist church in Montana, and we would hear about a new church that popped up. Hey, there's a new church in Belgrade or Bozeman, Montana, and then the next question would be, well, what church split? So maybe just explain to us what a church plant is. Is it just another name for a church split? Do they usually happen that way? Or explain to us, maybe you can even tell, the story of the church you're at and planting.
Yeah, I think sadly that is often the case. I'm familiar with a number of church plants who started that way, and sometimes the details are a little sticky. Sometimes it's legitimate. I have a dear friend who was an elder at a Presbyterian church, and he came under Baptist convictions and didn't know what to do. And the elders and the presbytery said to him, "You know what? We're okay with you actually going and planting another church in the same city, and we support you in that." And that's what he did. And there's a thriving Reformed Baptist church there now. That's probably rare, let's be honest, but it can happen that way for sure. For us, it was, I was actually in Clarksville, Tennessee, serving at Covenant Baptist Church in Clarksville with Pastor John Miller. And I had grown up in Atlanta and went to college in Lookout Mountain, and I had a desire to church plant, but it was something in the back of my mind. But really, we were directed by the fact that I just remember thinking back to my college days that there was no Reformed Baptist church for me to attend in this area. It was all Presbyterian, and so we targeted Chattanooga Lookout Mountain simply because there wasn't a confessional Reformed Baptist church in the city, and I was just overwhelmed by the fact that Covenant College produces a lot of students, a lot of Reformed students, and a lot of them who are Baptist as well. And the fact that there was no Reformed Baptist church here, I just said, there's a need. There's an absolute need, and that's why we targeted. I'd never lived in Chattanooga. I'd never spent much time here other than my undergraduate days, but I knew that the city could support it, and not only support it, but that the city needed it, and that's what directed our focus.
Okay.
So is your church made up of, especially initially, then a lot of that college age type folks?
Initially, absolutely. We were very much a college church plant. We were affectionately called a youth group for the first few years. Some of that goes into some of the mistakes that we made church planting when we launched here. We jumped in it too fast. We were working off some wrong data, but without, I'm sure we might get into that. But essentially, what happened was a couple of months in, it was one family, my family, and a bunch of college students, and nobody else really. And that is what the Lord used. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that's who the Lord brought into our church. Were college students, and those college students ended up settling down, graduating, getting jobs in the area, getting married, meeting their spouses in our church, having children, and ultimately that led to a good number of them are still with us, and that led to the stability and constituting of the church many years later.
Wow.
So Nathan, when you were going to plant this church and you were getting ready to do that, I guess my question is how did you know? Did you go to any kind of church planting assessment?
No, I wish I would have. I don't think that's always necessary, but I probably wish that I would have. I relied upon those who knew me the best, and of course, my fellow elder in Clarksville and the congregation there to evaluate my gifts, my personality, the situation. That's kind of what I relied on. I know that, other people go through assessments and they go to corporations and ministries that really evaluate those things. I think it all depends on what you're trying to do.
Mhm.
But no, I did not go through any of that. I just relied upon what the church, kind of the wisdom that they gave me. And I will say that um, that made things more difficult, I think, without a doubt.
Hmm.
I want to be honest in that there was a lot of things I'd been ordained. Well, I'd been in ministry only a year
Hmm.
by when I was sent out on my own, and I could have used a lot more time learning under older men and maturing in some of my gifts, and that paved the way for a lot of mistakes. But at the same time, the Lord used the church planting circumstances to grow me up really fast, and yeah, so it all turned out okay, at least at this point. But it was certainly rough going in the early days.
So initially, Nathan, did your church that you were a part of and you were an elder in, did they send you off and like were they over you like as the planting church and then give you a salary and they were kind of the elders over it? How did that relationship work? And what can you teach us about that process and how it should work?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So I was ordained as an elder in that church, and the church plant was essentially an extension of that church. We operated under their constitution, under their government, of course, under their officers as well, until the time that we could constitute ourselves, which ended up being about 3 years for us. So they supported us financially. Now they raised support from other people, so they weren't bearing that load all by themselves, but they supported us financially, and of course practically in many ways, so that they maintained oversight over me, even though they were 2 hours away, which made things a little difficult, but it made sure I wasn't there on my own, but it also gave a measure of accountability to me and the people that were gathering in Chattanooga.
Yeah, that's good. I'm a part of a denomination. We do a lot of church planting in our denomination. And when I was first uh, a pastor, I got kind of thrust into the church planting board,
Hmm.
and found myself sitting by Scott Thomas, if you know that name, from Mars Hill. He was the executive director of Acts 29 there for a while, and
Mhm.
we were talking about assessments and people going through this process. And I guess, what do you think about that? The denomination group of churches planting a church, how would that look, and how should that look? I'm very curious about that.
I think theologically, I would argue that church plants need to be planted by other churches, and that church plants need to have the oversight of other churches. But that doesn't mean that denominations and or associations can't come alongside and assist and help, and provide financial help, provide resources, all of the things, because church planting is such a big job. I mean, depending on the city, depending on the context, it can be a big, it can really balloon and become something that you need more than just one church to oversee. I mean, in our situation, there was probably, I think there was around 55 or 60 members of the Clarksville church. It wasn't a big church, but they had a lot of money saved up in savings that they were able to help, and they did a great job of networking with other churches to help support us and as sources of counsel and guidance as well. So, but at the end of the day, I do think that churches need to be planted by other churches rather than denominations. That denominations and parachurch ministries are not the church, and I think you can run into some problems if you don't have it grounded in the local church.
Yeah, good.
Is it normal for it to take quite a while before you get constituted and before you have elders and deacons?
I think it varies on the situation ultimately. In our situation, we kind of ran into a curveball. The reason that Chattanooga really worked out was because we had another family and another man who had a seminary education and had desires for ministry. He was here and he wanted to plant with us. And then we found a building, a place to meet right away that was essentially free, in a central location. And so it kind of upped our timeline a little bit. But at the end of the day, the situation with the other man, it didn't work out. And we just didn't work well together. And there were some theological differences. There were some practical differences. And I was left immediately kind of on my own, and basically had to start over from square one less than a year in. And I think, though, that's one reason it took us so long. It would have happened sooner had that situation worked out better. But, of course, you don't know those things going in. And so I think you can run into trouble. I know some churches that don't even have a first service until they're constituted. But typically, that's when you have a core group come together, whether you've built that core group up with Bible studies or other sorts of meetings over a period of time, or you have a group of families who are already committed to it. I think in that sense, you could probably constitute, right away. But for us, it essentially ended up just being me and having to start from the ground up. There was no way we could constitute until we had a stable membership, until we even had a stable core group. And that took years, ultimately, to get a stable core group of people, more than just college students, but actual, families that live in the area and can support the work.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah.
What would you like some of the challenges of church planning? You have a friend that calls you and you have just a little bit of time to talk about some of the challenges. What would you say?
Oh, there's so many. It's difficult work, and it takes resolve. It takes commitment to the mission. It takes a sense of calling. The minister, the church planter really needs to be convinced that this is what God has called them to. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. He's called to be faithful to it through the thick and thin, regardless. Some of the bigger challenges, though, I think were from people who came in. Church plants seem to attract people who are not happy in their own local church, and they look at a church plan and think, there's an opportunity for me to come in and shape the church, this new church, into my ideal church, my dream for what the church should be. And they seem to attract young men too, who, here's my opportunity for minister. My church doesn't recognize just how amazing I am. And so I can go in and wow this new pastor with my commitment and theological wisdom, and he's going to put me in leadership because clearly he needs help. He's just by himself as a church plant. It seems to attract those types of people. And so in the early years, I was fending those people off over and over again, and fighting that pull to go in this direction or that direction. And that it's difficult because for a church plant to be successful, you need people to join the church and give their time and money and commitment to the church. And so there's a sense in which you want to make people happy, in a legitimate sense. But then you have people who, I'm really convinced the church should go in this direction. And you realize, wow, if I don't follow their lead, then they're going to leave. And if they leave, what does that do to our budget? What does that do to our work here? And there's that constant temptation and tension to give in so that the church is successful, even if somebody tries to pull the church in a different direction. And that was one of the biggest challenges that I faced early on. That and alongside just the questioning of your gifts and calling, because people don't show up. What am I doing wrong? Maybe we need to change our doctrine. Maybe this person is right. They're not coming to hear me. Maybe maybe all of their ideas about what a church should be are right, and there's a lot of self-doubt that can easily creep in, those threaten to undermine the work from the early days if a minister's not prepared to handle them.
It seems like church planting is nowadays is a place that's kind of fraught with a lot of fads and a lot of uh, things like that, gimmicks, I guess, to get things going. Was that a temptation for you, is to dig into some of, kind of turn to some of those kind of things, or?
Well, what helped me, I think, tremendously, and it's tremendously important for me if I was to ever plan again or when I give advice, so make sure you have a very clear confession of faith going in. For ours, it was a London Baptist Confession of 1677, 1689. And, all these people that came in and wanted to pull the church in a different direction, I was able to say, look, this is what we believe. And if a confessional Reformed Baptist church doesn't work out, then it doesn't work out. We're not here just to plant whatever works. And at the same time, it was important, again, to be accountable to the Constitution and oversight of our sending church. And so I was able to tell some people, this could get me fired, right? Because this is not my church, not my idea, it's not my dream. This is the church of Covenant Baptist Church in Clarksville. But in some cases also, I was able to say, look, if you have this concern, you need to take it to them, to those elders. I was able to deflect some of that, so it wasn't just me being the bad guy. It wasn't just me and my opinion, but it was, hey, I'm accountable to this other group, to this other confession, and it might be better for you just to go directly to them. And of course, they would never do that. And that was an easy way for me to deflect so that it didn't all fall on my shoulders. But absolutely, without a church and a confession, the temptation to give in to just whatever is in vogue, whatever is popular in the church planning or church, it's there, and especially there when you're worried about, how am I going to pay the bills because this church isn't successful, and that's a real temptation.
And you just said the word successful. So with church planners, then how do you go about gauging success? Talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I think ultimately, at the end of the day, if a church plan is successful, what you have is, in Titus chapter 1, this is why I left you in Crete, to set what remained into order and appoint elders in every city, as I instructed you. That's what Paul says to his to Titus, his partner in planning churches and missionary work. And I think that gives us insight. What is a well-ordered church? A successful, for lack of a better term, church plant is a church that you have the commitment of people, so you have membership, but you also have the appointment of officers. And I think at the end of the day, you can run into danger if you just look at numbers or you just look at finances. I think, are there Christians here gathering regularly and committed to the assembly? And are there men that God has raised up to serve as deacons and elders? And when you reach that point, I think that you have success. And that was true for us. So we constituted after just under 3 years, with one elder, me, and one deacon, that the church called at the time, and 18 members. But at the time, we were not financially self-sufficient. Clarksville, our sending church, they agreed to keep helping with my salary until we reached financial independence. But we weren't there when we constituted. But they looked and they said, this is, the 18 members you have been there for 3 years, essentially, and they're ready to call you permanently, and they're ready to call a deacon, and we have other men who are ready to be trained. This is a church to us. And that's ultimately why we constituted, and that's ultimately what we kind of identified as successful, even though we couldn't pay our own bills by ourselves unless, we made drastic changes.
So now today, Rob's gone. So now today you have 6 years later. Now you have another pastor that evidently is being paid, right?
Yes,
Are you guys self-supporting now?
we are. Yes. We were almost there in 2019. We were probably 85% of our yearly budget was supplied by local tithes and offerings. So we were almost there. But once we constituted it, it gave more of a sense of legitimacy, and some other factors just led. We've grown tremendously in the 3 years since. And we've reached that point where we're able to support another full-time elder, and that's just the Lord's blessing our church. A lot of cultural things like COVID and some of the events in our country the last couple of years have played a role in that, and that we've seen some shifts in the area from people using COVID or other things to look out and visit other churches. So we've seen some growth in that area. Ultimately it's the Lord who's provided. And of course we made that a regular matter of prayer. We prayed that the Lord would provide for our needs in a way so that we believe in a plurality of elders. And so we've long prayed that the Lord would provide those means and raise up those men, and He's answered that prayer.
Just 2 elders?
Yes. We do have other men who are very close, and I anticipate we'll see ordination soon. We have 4 what we call gifted brothers. If you read through the London Baptist Confession, it speaks about gifted brothers. 3 of them are in seminary. They're men who are gifted in preaching and teaching, and who are studying and preparing for a life in ministry if God so calls. And so in that sense, I anticipate seeing them raised up very soon.
That's exciting.
How does a church know when it's time to plant a church? How does a church go about discerning if they should go through that process and plant a church?
Yeah, I certainly am under the conviction that we ought to always pray for those opportunities and seek those opportunities, whether we're talking about planting domestically or foreign. I mean, sending out a missionary is essentially the same thing. It's just in a foreign country, and it takes longer, but it's essentially the same thing. We're seeking to plant churches. So I think that should always be upon our hearts, in our prayers, on our radar. But when do we know when it's time to plant a church? Do you have someone who that's his burning desire? Does the church recognize his giftedness? Does the church have the means to support and send him out and provide that help and accountability? And then other factors, maybe more locally as well. So, when I graduated from seminary, I had a desire to church plant. I had 4 locations where I had friends and or opportunities that were potential for church planting. And when I arrived at the church in Clarksville, I let the officers know, the church know of my desires. They supported that. And we just started praying through and exploring those opportunities. And again, Chattanooga fell into place because all the factors lined up there. The Lord seemed to open doors there more than any other place, and He closed doors in other locations. And they simply they wanted to be a missionary sending church. They wanted to send men out and see more churches planted in their state, Tennessee. And so their desire was there. My desire was there. Opportunities just fell into place. And so we took the leap.
Good.
Well, say there's a guy in our church that's itching to go plant a church. And I say, go. You need to talk to Nathan White for a few minutes. What's some advice you're going to give him right off the bat?
I would probably first ask him if he was crazy, if he's a glutton for self-punishment. Brothers, it's hard work. It is hard work. It's not for the faint of heart. My recommendation, real practically, is make sure, if we look in the book of Acts, missionaries were sent out 2 by 2, and that is so important. That was our desire when we planted, and that fell through. And I bore the brunt of that. It was very, very difficult because I was the only guy after a little while. So I would look for 2 by 2, and I also encourage men. You must have a really strong relationship with your sending church. They are going to be there when you need them the most, and if you don't have a good relationship with them, you're going to be crushed. It's going to be hard when the road gets tough. It's all going to be on you, and it's going to, ministry burnout is real. Discouragement, depression, anxiety, all of the challenges of planning a church will be squarely on your shoulders, and no man is able to bear those. So somebody came to me and talked to me. Are you sure you really want to serve? Are you willing to take the financial hit for many years until the church is established? You're not going to be paid what you can be paid in a normal church. In a normal church. And do you have that relationship where where you can fall back on and really receive the support and encouragement of your church when the times get tough? That's typically where I go right away.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice.
Yeah. Is there any subject related to church planning that we haven't asked you about that you feel like, hey, this ought to be covered?
Yeah, I think we've probably touched on it all. At least the central, most important aspects of it. Just in the sense of, make sure a man is firm in his convictions. He has the support of the local congregation. There's accountability. If possible, he's sent out with another man. And that, the location and details are wisely chosen. I think you mentioned earlier about a church split. I know men who've tried church plants through a church split, and sometimes it's worked out, but sometimes that can just exasperate all the other problems of a church plant, all the other challenges. It takes great wisdom, and I think that maybe in the last 10 to 15 years with Acts 29 and other organizations who've emphasized church planting and have just thrown men out as fast as possible, I think the church has reaped some of the consequences from that. We certainly want to plant as much as possible, but take it slow and make sure you're doing things the right way. It'll save you in the long term. I think looking back, you never want to look back and say, wow, I destroyed my family. I burned myself out. I have no desire for ministry now. I'm jaded and I'm just done because of all the challenges. Those things are real, and trying to head that up and prepare as much as possible before jumping into the fire, and realizing that no pace really is too slow unless you're not doing what the Lord's clearly called you to do, but just being patient. And so often we get impatient. We want to see a church planted tomorrow. We want to see it constituted tomorrow. We want to see it self-established tomorrow. We want to see it sending out other church planters tomorrow. And there's a danger in trying to speed those things up. I look at it as, look, I've been here 6 years. My prayer is that 60 years from now, this church will still be here, and this church will have a long history of faithfulness. That helps me not get caught up in the day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, even year-to-year ups and downs of church and church planning. Long-term perspective on ministry, wait for the Lord to do his work. If the Lord is in it, it may seem slow, but eventually in the end, it's going to be established. It's going to be there, and it's going to bring glory to his name.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Nathan, I just want to thank you so much for taking your time and being with us today. This has been a really great and helpful conversation. And so,
Yeah,
we'll
thank
have
you
you-
for having me. I really enjoy it. The subject is near and dear to my heart, and I'm really thankful that you guys are covering that and asking some of these difficult questions. They're important, and I hope that we'll give due consideration to them with the wisdom and prayers of God.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.